Hello, I thought I would make a video about my favorite books. There's this meme that was going around apparently on BookTube at one point, and they were like, pick 10 of your favorite books and talk about them. So, what I've decided to do is I'm talking about series of books sometimes if they're multiple part series. And I picked out 10 things that I really like, kind of formative that I grew up reading. Um, there was a pen under my. Anyway, so it's kind of hard to know where to start. I guess I'll start with this one, the Gormenghast novels by Mervyn Peake. I discovered these a long time ago on the internet. I had been in a Tad Williams group online, a discussion group for the author of this series called Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Um, and while those are fun fantasy books, kind of in a Tolkien style derived fantasy books. When I was on this discussion forum, probably in my teens, early teens, I found out about this author, and he lived around the same time as Tolkien, I believe. I don't know if they were the exact same generation or what, but the Gormenghast novels are kind of pretty different from the Lord of the Rings. They're extremely atmospheric. It's about, the first one is called Titus Groan. Titus Groan being the eventual hero of the books. But in the first book, it ends when he's 1 year old. So he's just barely born. And it's a world that's extremely closed off, but there's this huge, hulking, towering, looming castle that's just full of all sorts of nooks and crannies and halls, and it's just huge, and it's inhabited by like really eccentric, fascinating, extremely well described characters, all with their own issues and so on. And so it's run by like Ritual, heavily run by Ritual. It's kind of like ossified in this like ritual structure. And the Earl that's in charge, ostensibly, although he just has to follow all these protocols, finally has a son, and that son is Titus. And Titus is going to be the 77th Earl, and it's like a big deal when he's born, and that's what happens in the first beginning of the book Titus Groan. And then it just, the language is some of the most amazing writing you will ever encounter. It's extremely atmospheric. One person who recommended it is one person who was really moved by these books was C.S. Lewis. And he says, there's a quote in a blurb on the back here. It says, Peake's books are actual additions to life. They give, like certain rare dreams, sensations we never had before, and enlarge our conception of the range of possible experience. It is really hard to explain how you can get lost in this book. It is just utterly fascinating. You can taste the setting. It is the richest writing, most poetic prose writing you can ever imagine. And there's some poetry in it too. And the most awesome anti-hero character in here too is the character of Steerpike. I also love Dr. Prunesqualler and Fuchsia. All of them are cool. The Countess, I mean, they're not cool exactly, but it's just fascinating. It's really like the antihero, you end up like really rooting for him a lot more than for Titus, kind of. So he's like really well executed, and just like a really, really like it's a really well written book. So this edition from Overlook Press, I don't know if it's still in print. I think they might have come up with another one that has. I saw a hardback one recently at my bookstore, local independent bookstore, And I kind of coveted it also because it has a lot of pictures, because Mervyn Peake was an artist also. And some of his work is in this one, but even more is in the hardback one that I saw recently. And like you can just see some of his work, and it is just fantastic. Like there are no books like this in the world, as far as I can tell. This is like a one-off. Titus Groan and Gormenghast are really awesome. Honestly, I have to work through Titus Alone again because I think I never really finished it when I was trying to read it a long time ago. So I know it makes me a kind of bad Peake fan, but I'm gonna try to do that sometime. And I also want to get Titus Awakes, which is Mervyn Peake's widow, Maeve Gilmore Peake. She wrote with him a sequel to all this, and I'm looking forward to trying to get that too. But it looks big, but you will not regret if you really allow yourself to feel it. This is real art here. I like the addition to it. Just feels good, like the way that the font looks and everything. And I think that the recent hardback one also has a similar font and looks pretty good too. So this is definitely formative. I think I read it probably in 9th grade. And I remember being in chemistry class and just like utterly wrapped in this book. And I really recommend it. The Gormenghast novels, Titus Groan, Gormenghast, and Titus Alone to a lesser extent, because I gotta get through it myself. And I'm thinking I'll get the audiobooks and listen to the audiobook. I don't recommend someone listening to this on audio. I think you really need to immerse yourself in it on your own. But there are audiobooks, and it might help me to if I can get over the voice of someone foreign reading this. But I think I'll try that. But for the first experience, I really recommend that you just immerse yourself in it on your own. So this is fantastic. Okay, so the other thing that I really want to say is since I talked about C.S. Lewis, I'm going to talk about my favorite book by C.S. Lewis so far. And strangely, it's a book that he would probably think is really weird that it's my favorite book, because he was so shy at the beginning about writing about himself. He talks about how autobiography is not something he felt very comfortable engaging in. But I really loved Surprised by Joy when I read it. I got it for a gift on my 18th birthday for my parents. And his description of the feeling of joy, as he defines it, is something that I really identify with. It's kind of this longing for another world, or like seeing beyond from details in mythology that he would read and stuff like that. Just kind of seeing into like a beyond kind of. And he kind of, it helps him develop into his belief in God and stuff like that. And I haven't read this in a long time, and I want to read it again, but I have to say that it really struck me as a very good book when I read it. And just very enjoyable, and I could really relate so much to a lot of what he was saying. So this is one of my favorites too. And there's probably a lot that I've forgotten, and I could do with a reread of this one too. But anyway, one of my definite old favorites is this one, Wuthering Heights. I don't know, there's like a lot of split opinions about this. Some people probably think it's like a typical romance novel. I don't think it is. I think like if you read it, you will see that there's a lot of very violence and like violent emotion and a lot of extremes of behavior. The main characters are not very good, you know, in the main. They have, they're very troubled. I was moved from the very beginning. I really wanted to know what the heck was going on at this Wuthering Heights place. From the very beginning, when you have Mr. Lockwood coming to reside in the neighborhood and wondering about his landlord, and all the stuff going on in that house, the dogs, the fireplace, everything. Like, what the heck? Like, from the beginning, like, I had a friend that tried to read this and she was like not getting into it at all. But I cannot understand how someone isn't immediately captured and sucked in by this and like want to know what's going on. And it's twisted and tormented, and it's a twisted and tormented love story, and it's pretty awesome. It kind of reminds me a little bit. Well, nobody's really going to know this reference probably, but there's an obscure um, Russian or Ukrainian movie called Gypsy Camp Goes to Heaven, or something like that. I don't know what it's translated to in English, but it has the same type of like tormented love affair where like the leads are their flaws cause like a lot of suffering for themselves, but it's so intensely described and so passionate and so interesting that like you just get sucked in. It's really good. And I like this edition. I think it's pretty cool. It cost 45 cents, I think. I like how it looks. I like this cover. It looks really 40s to me. Apparently it was published in 1960, but this looks like it was made in the 40s or something, this picture. This is my favorite Bronte sister novel. I know maybe there are things in it that are okay. I wonder if Anne Bronte is a lot more aware of like the real dangers when people actually behave like they do in this book, because it's really almost borderline mental illness stuff going on in this thing. But I just love it. My passionate nature was just drawn to the tormentedness in this book, and I really recommend it. But again, I guess it's only for certain temperaments. Maybe I wouldn't recommend it to absolutely everybody, but quite honestly, the same goes for the Gormenghast novels. Not everybody's gonna like these things. Not everybody's gonna be temperamentally suited to enjoying them. But I really think there's excellence in here if your eyes are open to it. And same with Wuthering Heights. Absolutely amazing writing. The novel itself is so well constructed. It's hard to imagine making a gem like this. Everything is just, every word has its place, and everything brings a mood and develops needed qualities in the book. And it's just fantastic. And I've had this edition for ages and I just love it. It's all jacked up, but okay. If we're on the topic of female writers from the 19th century, I'm not going to put Middlemarch here because while I enjoyed it, I don't think it's my favorite, and I don't think it's as accomplished in a way as like just plain, simple, less frilly Jane Austen. Jane Austen, if I can say that. I feel odd calling her plain, simple, less frilly. But in a way she is. There's a directness and a perfection to her writing. It's just like distilled perfection. I just really love it. I have 2 editions of Mansfield Park. This is the one that I read in high school, and I still remember it fondly. And this is the one I got more recently. And one of the reasons why I'm choosing Mansfield Park is because the heroine is a very controversial figure. Some people think she is way too much of a pushover and maybe a bit of a prig and a little bit just weak. I don't know, timid. She's timid, and that's one of the things that I like about this is that you're not going to have an Elizabeth Bennet going on here, but you can have someone that you can relate to if you've known moments of insecurity, if you've known timidity. Yeah, Fanny Price is really like a bit more self-effacing. A bit more self-effacing is a little bit of an understatement. But now she is offset by a really cool cast in the form of the Crawfords, I think. Mary Crawford and Henry Crawford. There's some pretty cool characters. And just really well done. Obviously not morally correct, as we will find as the book progresses, but um, the dialogue is just, well, it's Jane Austen, so what can you say? I think everything by her is just wonderful. It just crackles with wit and sharpness. Like, people think that, I think people can dismiss her as chick lit a little bit too early before they really like consider that she's like, there's like a kind of like a brutality to her, just like a sharpness, and that's evident in this book as in all of them. And it's really witty. This one is pretty, I would say it's pretty heavy on some of the morals too, but I think even Jane Austen herself got sucked in having fun portraying the Crawfords. So you'll see how it goes. This is a great book. Um, it's a great book, and it covers a little bit more diverse social classes than her other ones do, I think, because it shows Fanny's family in Portsmouth too. So now I will show you something else that I read in high school. There was a sale in high school. They were selling a bunch of old books for really cheap, and I picked up this book by, I don't know how to say, Tanith or Tanith Lee. And this is actually the last volume in this series called The Lords of Darkness, I think. Or no, the whole series is called Tales from the Flat Earth. The first volume that has the first 2 books in it, in this edition. I actually gave it away at one point, so I don't have it now, Everlast, although I do have this edition, volume 2 of Tales of the Flat Earth, called Death's Master. These are some of my favorite stories. It's like the Old Testament Bible mixed in with like the Arabian Nights, mixed in with just her having fun with like mythology. And I just love these books. I don't love all of Tanith Lee. I feel like some of her stuff is less successful. There's a lot of the desire there, but like less of a successful execution. But in these things, she just really hit her stride, and they're extremely entertaining stories. And I also have enjoyed seeing some reviews and summaries online of them. That's kind of where I was encouraged to pick them up. They're pretty cool. I recommend them. I don't know how to talk about them more because I haven't read them in a while, and I don't want to say something completely wrong, but it has to do with, reminds me a little bit of Neil Gaiman's The Endless characters in his graphic novels. But there are gods, and then there are like the Lords of Darkness who personify different things about mortals. So there's like the first one before this is called Knight's Master. I don't have it because I gave it away. It was in a duology in here, or a trilogy edition that looked like this with this cover. That's Azrarn, who's the Prince of Demons. That's Knight's Master. This is Death's Master, and this is Chuz, the Lord of Delusion. And these are really good books. Good fantasy. I think they're cut above a lot of fantasy, just in terms of inventiveness, solid writing that flows well, just really fun characterization. Yeah. Okay. Speaking of other fantasy, I always like fantasy books. Maybe I should have said that this is going to be mostly fantasy, but this series, I really enjoyed it. It's a trilogy. It's the Riddle Master of Hed trilogy. Hed, H-E-D. And it's one of my favorite authors, Patricia A. McKillop. I could have chosen another one of her books called Winter Rose, because that's what started me on really enjoying her writing. But these are just really like fun. I think I've encountered some people online that don't like them. think they were particular fans of. Oh, they also didn't like Gene Wolfe, which I am not a fan of Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun. I tried to read it and I just gave up because I'm like, it's not that it was too hard, really. It's just I didn't buy it. I couldn't get into it. But this stuff, I don't know why I'm comparing them. It's not exactly like Book of the New Sun. Not at all, really. It's kind of high fantasy. So there's a landholder ruler of a small island, Morgan, and he ends up on an adventure to save his land, pretty much, from these mysterious, kind of like fae-like beings that are like invading, or yeah. So, and yeah, it's been a while since I read this one too, but the books in this series are called The Riddlemaster of Head, Heir of Sea and Fire, and Harpist in the Wind. And I remember reading Heir of Sea and Fire on the balcony of our old apartment during a rainstorm at night, and it was an amazing experience. I just have such fond memories. These are pretty good. These are quite good. Patricia A. McKillip, The Riddlemaster. This is the edition. 3 books, a trilogy. Now, this is going on too long. It's already 21 minutes. But I have more to talk about. One of my favorite series is, I don't have book 1 anymore because I lent it out to someone and I haven't gotten it back, but I do have 2 copies of book 2. And I have books 3 and 4 in different editions. It's a tetralogy called the Holdfast Chronicles. And if you are into dystopian fiction, if you are into adventure stories, if you are into feminist sci-fi and fantasy, you really have to read these things because they're really good. In my opinion, they're much better than The Handmaid's Tale, although they're not really the same exact genre. Basically, they take place in a future dystopian world that's been devastated after a horrible environmental catastrophe. And if you kind of stretch your imagination and follow where the story leads, you will be taken through like quite an adventure. And I personally found that they were unputdownable when you got into them. The plot just gallops along. The characterization is done really well. You really want to know what happens, and it's just freaking good. It's freaking good adventure. And yeah. And you kind of forget that you're reading something like ideological or whatever, like feminist or whatever. If you can get over that, you will just enjoy it. Just enjoy it galloping along and see what happens. You want to know what happens. So, one of my favorite books by Ursula Le Guin is one of her less popular ones. It's called Always Coming Home. Everyone knows Ursula Le Guin now. I feel like she's very popular and very well respected, and not just among science fiction readers anymore, because she's transcended genre and made it really, And this book, I've heard it called didactic environmentalism, but I don't think it is. I think it's pretty neat. It's check out this first line. The people in this book might be going to have lived a long, long time from now in Northern California. Can you figure that out? Might be going to have lived a long, long time from now in Northern California. It is awesome. At first, you don't have your bearings, so you don't know what's going on. But you figure it out. It's kind of an anthropological exploration and weaving together this culture of these people called the Kesh, who live in kind of a version of the Napa Valley. It's just like, At first, I was just reading through and skipping all the parts that were the actual narratives. A woman called Stone Telling tells her life story, and you're just like, if you just skip for that, you are missing the point. Read everything. Go through the articles. Go through the other short stories, the histories, the poetry, the songs, the anthropological essays. There's little plays inside it. It's really strange. It's really unusual, and it works. It's fantastic. I got my brother an edition of this that had come out recently, which was like, I think it was called like American Masters or something. It was black, and it was like recent. I'm not really doing a good job explaining what I'm talking about, but I got him an edition of this book in the hopes that maybe someday he will read it. It is pretty amazing. Highly recommended. Also, of course, The Left Hand of Darkness, but I feel like that's more of a typical recommendation, and I could do with a reread of that one. So, I'm going to talk about a series that, okay, again, I'm talking about editions a lot because it makes me sad. I ordered these when they had been coming out when I was in high school, and I got a whole bunch of mass market paperbacks that had different covers, and as it was being released, because it was one volume published in the UK, I believe, but in the US they published it in like little chunks of 4 little chunks. But I had since gotten rid of them on a whim or something, and that was really dumb. So I bought this one, and it's the whole thing, and it's quite a doorstopper. And it's alternate history, a female mercenary captain, and some Visigoths that are attacking Europe, and they manage to put out the sun. And that sounds pretty crazy, and it is a pretty crazy book, and it really gallops along. The only thing that might be a little too much is it is pretty graphic. There's a lot of cussing in this, but I guess she tries to capture what soldiers would have been like, or what they are like, for all I know. And once you get used to that, it's quite a good adventure story as well. I have to say, I don't really understand all the stuff having to do with, like, I don't want to spoil anything, but, like, I don't really understand the ending, how it resolves. But that's not to say it wasn't satisfying somehow. So yeah, check it out. Ash, A Secret History by Mary Gentle. Alright, finally, I'm going to talk about one that I found more recently that I really enjoyed. It is Cuchulainn of Myr, I don't know if I'm saying that right, by Lady Augusta Gregory. And it is a retelling of the Ulster cycle in ancient Irish mythology. I don't know how ancient it is because it was only written down from the 8th century on, as far as we know, but it's stories that were from earlier, probably around the time of Christ, that were happening in Ireland at the time. Probably around the 1st century BC, or right around the 1st century AD, something like that. But it is just really, this is like a classic, I would say, in like the Irish, or the Celtic revival, I think. I believe, I'm not sure what year it's from. She lived till 1932, but this might be like from the early 1900s. Yeah, 1911. So, she translates the Irish stories about Cuchulainn, about Deirdre, about Angus, about all the different characters in these stories, Maeve and Ailill, and it is, in Conchobar, I should say. I don't know if I'm saying that name right. Connor? I don't know. I've seen it like that before. I don't know how to pronounce all of these things, although there is a guide at the end. Anyway, it is really highly entertaining. I just love these mythological stories. Now, I have to say she did expurgate them a little bit, in the sense that in some cases she didn't use my favorite version of the story. I don't want to spoil anything, but for instance, when Deirdre dies, Lady Gregory uses a less extreme version of the story, and I prefer a different one. But read other things in this telling these stories, but also read this one because this is quite well done. And I just love the way she made everyone talk in these books. It's kind of like it's translated from the Irish, so you get the flavor of the way people talked, especially when in Lady Gregory's, like the people from Lady Gregory's youth when she was growing up. She was raised by a lot of I don't know what to call them, like native Irish people that spoke in this like really beautiful way. So check this out. All right, that's some of my favorites. I'll recap which ones I shared. The Gormenghast novels. Surprised by Joy by C.S. Lewis. Oh, these are by Mervyn Peake, by the way. Riddlemaster Trilogy by Patricia McKillip. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Always Coming Home by Ursula K. Le Guin. Tales from the Flat Earth by Tanith Lee. Tanith Lee? My favorite Jane Austen book, Mansfield Park. Ash, A Secret History by Mary Gentle. The Holdfast Chronicles by Susie McKee Charnas. I didn't tell her name before, but that's her name. These are the last 2 out of 4. And Cuchulainn of Moorhymne by Lady Gregory. Thanks for watching. This was kind of long. I don't know if I'll be able to post it, but I will try.